Tears, indistinguishable from the salt rain, lashing her cheeks, streamed from the luminous gray eyes of Lady Isolde as she stood, wide with anguish yet burning with unyielding resolve, while her trembling fingers crushed a forbidden parchment, ink-smudged words that threatened to unravel the sacred legacy her parents had forged from the ashes of sorrow. Below, the sea raged in apocalyptic frenzy, devouring the rocks as if hungry for her very soul. Above, lightning carved the heavens, illuminating the distant silhouette of a fleeing ship that bore away the man she had dared to love. A man whose secrets now stood revealed as blades aimed at Blackthorne's heart. Amidst the cataclysmic fury of a midnight tempest that clawed at Castle Blackthorne's weathered battlements, Lady Isolde Blackthorne stood perilously upon the precipice of the storm-lashed cliff, her raven-black cloak billowing like the wings of some defiant seabird, honey-brown tresses whipping across a face pale as moonlit marble. If this razor-edged moment of betrayal and defiance has seized your breath, hit subscribe now, for the revelations surging toward these cliffs will shatter illusions, reforge destinies, and prove once more that love, like the tide, answers only to those bold enough to command it. Yet the story does not begin here, on this knife edge of despair. It begins months earlier, when the winds were gentler and the shadows only hinted at what they might become. Spring had returned to Vermore with its customary reluctance, painting the cliffs in tentative greens and coaxing white camellias into defiant bloom within the castle's glass conservatory. Castle Blackthorne, once a fortress of silence and old grief, now breathed with the quiet vitality of a house reclaimed by love. Sunlight slanted through high arrow-slit windows, gilding the flagstones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and the air carried the mingled scents of sea salt, beeswax, and fresh bread from the kitchens below. Servants moved with lighter steps. Portraits on the paneled walls seemed less stern. Even the raven banner snapping atop the highest tower appeared to ride the breeze with pride rather than warning. In the great hall that morning, Lady Isolde Blackthorne paced before the vast basalt hearth, her emerald skirts whispering over the stones like waves retreating from shore. At 20 summers, she was the living embodiment of her parents' hard-won harmony. Her mother's honey-brown hair fell in soft curls to her waist, her father's storm-gray eyes held the same measuring depth, and her posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted, betrayed a spirit that refused to be diminished by expectation. Yet today those eyes flickered with unrest, and her fingers worried at the edges of a sealed letter bearing the provincial council's crest. Lord Cashan Blackthorne sat at the long oak table, silver head bent over estate ledgers, his broad frame still commanding despite the passage of years. Beside him, Lady Seraphine arranged camellias in a crystal vase with the same deliberate grace she brought to every act, as though beauty itself were a bulwark against encroaching shadows. The ritual was unchanged. One perfect white bloom for each year of their marriage, gathered by Cashan's own hand before dawn. This morning there were 27. "The council grows impatient," Cashan said at last, setting down his quill. His voice, low and deliberate, carried the weight of old authority tempered by newer wisdom. Trade routes shift. Border disputes flare. House Ravencrest circles like a shark scenting blood. They speak of alliances, Isolde. Of your future. Isolde ceased pacing and turned to face him, the firelight catching gold in her hair. My future, father, or the castle's continuance? I have heard the whispers in the village. Ravencrest covets our cliffs, our beacon, our unbroken line. But to barter me as shield feels perilously close to the chains you and mother once shattered. Seraphine's hand stilled upon a petal. She met her daughter's gaze with eyes that had once stared down their own tempest. We forged our path through fire and choice, my heart. Yours need not echo ours precisely, yet Vermore's tides spare no house that stands alone. The words settled heavily. Isolde had grown up on the legend of her parents' marriage. The arranged union born of debt and duty, the slow, defiant blooming of love against every expectation, the vow that no heart in this house would ever again be commanded. It was the creed by which Blackthorne now lived, Yet creed and necessity often sailed uneasy waters together. That afternoon, seeking air and clarity, Isolde walked the coastal path that skirted the cliffs. Gulls wheeled overhead, screaming defiance at the sky. Below, the sea hurled itself against black rocks in ceaseless, cleansing fury. She walked until her legs ached and the wind had torn her hair free of its pins, honey-brown strands streaming like pennants of surrender. When she turned back, the castle rose against scudding clouds. Less fortress now, more ancient guardian crouched upon the edge of the world. In the library that evening, 3 stories of oak shelves rising into perfumed gloom, she found traces of the man her father had been before love softened his edges. Watercolors of headlands and lighthouses rendered with patient sensitivity, charts annotated in precise script, a pressed sprig of sea lavender marking a passage on treacherous currents. And, tucked between volumes, a small leather journal whose final entry, dated the night her mother first crossed into his tower chamber, read simply, "She came of her own will. The tide has turned." Isolde closed the book gently, throat tight. She had inherited their freedom, yes, but also the burden of preserving what they had built. Somewhere beyond the windows, a ship's lantern winked on the horizon, brief and enigmatic. Her pulse quickened without permission. Later, in her chamber overlooking the now calm sea, she stood at the open casement, letting the night breeze cool her cheeks. The room was a tapestry of both parents. Botanical sketches in her mother's delicate hand, maritime maps annotated by her father, a single white camellia in a porcelain bowl upon the mantel. She was safe here, cherished, free. Yet freedom, she was learning, carried its own restless weight. As sleep finally claimed her, dreams threaded through her mind. Crashing waves, an outstretched hand in the darkness, and the faint, foreboding creak of castle gates opening to unseen visitors. Little did she know that the sealed letter upon the breakfast table was only the first whisper of a gathering storm, one that would test not merely her heart, but the enduring vow that had redeemed Blackthorne itself. What would you do when the legacy you cherish begins to demand a price you never agreed to pay? Share your thoughts below. I read every one. Dawn broke over Vermore in fragile rose and gold, the sea below Castle Blackthorne lying deceptively calm, as though the night's restless dreams had never disturbed its depths. Isolde slipped from her chamber while the household still slept, drawn by habit and unrest to the winding coastal path that traced the cliff's edge. The air was sharp with salt and the faint sweetness of early wildflowers pushing through thin soil. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries thin and piercing, like warnings spoken in a language older than stone. Her boots crunched over gravel still damp with dew, and the wind, gentler now than it would later become, tugged at her unbound hair, sending honey-brown strands dancing across her shoulders. She walked swiftly, as if distance might outpace the questions that had kept her wakeful. The castle rose behind her, its towers catching the first light like spears of granite and memory. From this angle it appeared almost benevolent. Windows glowing amber, raven banners stirring lazily, smoke curling from kitchen chimneys in promise of warm bread and strong tea. Yet Isolde knew its silences too well, the corridors that remembered sorrow, the portraits whose eyes followed with quiet judgment, the very stones that seemed to hold their breath whenever legacy was spoken aloud. By the time she returned, the conservatory was already bathed in sunlight, glass panes alive with the hum of bees among camellia bushes and lemon trees heavy with fruit. Her parents sat at the wrought iron table beneath a canopy of jasmine, breakfast laid simply. Fresh bread, salted butter, honey the color of amber, and the inevitable porcelain bowl holding a single white bloom. 27 years, and the ritual unchanged. Seraphine looked up as Isolde entered, her smile soft but searching. "You rose with the gulls again." She poured tea, steam curling like incense. "The sea called you early." Isolde settled into the chair opposite, accepting the cup with both hands as though its warmth might steady her. "It whispers of places beyond these cliffs," she admitted, "of lives not measured by ledgers and alliances." Her gaze flicked to her father, who buttered bread with deliberate care, silver hair catching the light like moonlit surf. Cassion's storm-gray eyes lifted to meet hers. Freedom is our gift to you, Isolde. Yet even freedom casts ripples. Ravencrest's proposal is not mere ambition. It is survival dressed in velvet. Their harbors control the northern passage. Without alliance, our beacon's light may dim, our trade falter. I will not command your heart, but I will not pretend the cost is imaginary. The words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Isolde felt the ripples reach her chest. She had been raised on the legend, the marriage born of ruinous debt, the slow forging of love from restraint and choice, the vow etched into Blackthorne's very bones that no soul would again be bound against its will. It was the air she breathed, the creed she carried. Yet now it seemed to demand something in return. Seraphine reached across the table, her fingers brushing Isolde's wrist. "Tell us what stirs beneath your restlessness, my heart." Isolde hesitated, then spoke softly. "I fear becoming an echo. You fought for choice and won it. What if mine leads elsewhere, and weakens all you built?" Cassion set down his knife. "Then we will stand with you whatever tide you choose. But choice made in fear is no choice at all." After breakfast, seeking solitude, Isolde climbed the narrow stair to the east wing's round chamber, the sanctum her father had once avoided and now visited only in quiet penance. The door, carved with briar roses rather than ravens, yielded to her touch as though it had been waiting. Inside, the single hanging lantern burned day and night, its golden pool illuminating walls lined with slender volumes of poetry and leather-bound journals. At the far end hung the life-sized portrait of the First Lady Isolde Blackthornne, painted in 1828. Sapphire gown, dark hair unbound, eyes wide with a sorrow that time had not dimmed. Isolde approached slowly, as one might a confessor. The painted gaze seemed to follow her, not with accusation, but with weary understanding. Beneath the portrait, upon a small ebony table, rested the velvet-bound journal her father had kept in the final months of his first marriage. She had read it before, but today the words felt newly sharp. She opened to a marked page, handwriting younger, less controlled. October 15th, 1828. She fades a little more each day. The physicians speak of consumption, of sea air, of rest, of everything except the truth. It is not her lungs that fail her, but her heart. She says the walls listen and judge. I brought her camellias. She smiled, but the smile broke halfway. They will outlive me, she whispered. As everything here outlives joy. God forgive me. I do not know how to let her go. Further on, after the death. April 3rd, 1829. I stood upon the cliff where we watched storms together and swore an oath to the wind and the waves. Never again will I bind a soul to this place against its will. If fate brings another beneath this roof as wife, I will offer her every freedom I denied my Isolde, even if that freedom means she leaves me. Better solitude than another light extinguished. Tears pricked Isolde's eyes. She traced the pressed sea lavender that still marked the page, fragile and purple against the yellowed paper. Her namesake had come willingly, lovingly, and been consumed all the same. Her mother had come unwillingly, and chosen to stay. Both paths had carved wounds into the man who now gathered camellias each dawn with reverent hands. Closing the journal, Isolde looked up at the portrait. "You see it too, don't you?" she whispered. "The fear that history circles like a gull above a wreck." That afternoon, restless, she rode down to the village nestled in the lee of the cliffs. Thatched roofs huddled against the wind. Fishing boats bobbed in the small harbor. The air smelled of tar, kelp, and wood smoke. She wandered the market stalls, greeting fishermen who had known her since childhood, accepting a handful of periwinkles from an old woman who claimed they brought clear dreams. And there, beside a cart laden with rope and lanterns, she saw him again, the stranger from the horizon ship. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, dark coat weathered by salt and sun, hair black as raven wings falling across a brow marked by an old scar. His posture spoke of command tempered by solitude. His hands, scarred, capable, tested the weight of a coil of rope with absent expertise. When his gaze lifted and met hers across the crowd, the world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. Eyes the deep blue of storm-tossed depths held hers for a moment too long, a flicker of recognition or challenge, passing through them before he inclined his head in grave courtesy and turned away. Isolde's pulse thrummed in her throat. She did not know his name, only that his vessel had appeared on the horizon thrice in as many weeks, anchoring just beyond the reef as though waiting for something or someone. Evening found the family gathered in the music room, firelight dancing across paneled walls. Seraphine played a Beethoven sonata, notes rising mournful and triumphant. Isolde joined on the second piano, their harmonies weaving like light through water. Cassian sat in his armchair, eyes half closed, the lines of his face softened by melody and memory. When the final chord faded, silence settled, warm and complete. Yet as they rose to retire, Cassian paused at the door. "Ravencrest's emissary arrives within a fortnight," he said quietly. "We will receive him with courtesy. After that, the choice remains yours." Isolde nodded, throat tight. In her chamber later, she stood at the window watching moonlight silver the waves. Far out, a single lantern winked once, twice, then vanished into the dark, as though the sea itself kept secrets it was not yet ready to share. Sleep came slowly, threaded with dreams of outstretched hands in gathering storm, of a voice calling her name across endless water, and of castle doors opening to strangers bearing both promise and peril. The echoes of the past were growing louder. Soon they would become thunder. The great iron gates of Castle Blackthorne groaned inward on a morning when the sky hung low and sullen, heavy with the promise of rain. A procession of sleek black carriages splashed through the courtyard puddles, their wheels churning mud into dark spirals, while footmen in sodden livery hurried forward with lanterns that flickered like wary eyes against the gloom. From the shelter of the portico, Isolde watched the arrival with a heart that beat too swiftly, her hands clasped tightly before her to still their tremor. Lord Elias Ravencrest stepped down first, tall and golden-haired, his charcoal velvet coat cut to perfection, a smile curving his lips with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed. His eyes, bright hazel, sharp as winter light, found hers at once and held them with deliberate warmth. Behind him came his sister, Lady Vesper, slender and pale, her gaze cool and assessing. Then a cluster of attendants bearing trunks emblazoned with the Ravencrest stag. The air carried the mingled scents of wet stone, horse, and the faint metallic tang of coming storm. Cassian stood at Isolde's right, his presence steady as the castle itself. Seraphine at her left, fingers brushing her daughter's sleeve in silent reassurance. As Elias approached the steps, he swept a bow of impeccable grace. "Lady Isolde," he said, voice smooth as oiled steel, "your beauty rivals the wild splendor of these cliffs. I come bearing not only my house's respects, but a proposal for a future that might bind our strengths against every tempest." Inside the great hall, fires roared in welcome, casting long fingers of light across flagstones and raven-carved mantels. Wine was poured, deep ruby from southern vineyards, and platters offered. Smoked salmon, winter pears, cheeses veined with blue. Conversation began courteously enough. Harvest yields, the new lighthouse at Morven Point, the shifting trade winds. Yet beneath the civility ran a current as inexorable as the tide. Elias seated himself beside Isolde upon a settle near the hearth, his posture relaxed yet proprietary. "Our northern harbors complement your southern beacon perfectly," he said, leaning close enough that she caught the faint spice of his cologne. "A union between us would forge an unbroken chain from coast to coast. Imagine it, Blackthorne's light guiding ships safely into Ravencrest waters, our combined fleets unchallenged. Your legacy secured forever." The word legacy struck her like a cold wave. She felt her parents' gazes upon her. Cassion's measuring, Seraphine's quietly fierce, and lifted her chin. Alliances are weighed carefully in this house, my lord. Freedom in choice has ever been our creed. Elias's smile did not falter, but something flickered behind his eyes. Freedom is a rare vintage, Lady Isolde. Yet even the rarest must sometimes be blended with necessity if it is to endure. That night, alone in her chamber, Isolde paced before the fire, the proposal echoing like thunder in a distant valley. She had expected ambition. She had not expected the way Elias's words wrapped duty in velvet, making refusal feel like recklessness. Sleep eluded her. At length she threw a cloak over her nightgown and slipped down to the armory, a cavernous room of shadows and steel where old banners hung like ghosts. Moonlight slanted through high windows, silvering rows of antique swords and dented shields. In a forgotten chest beneath a tattered standard, her seeking fingers closed around a small rusted locket she had discovered years ago but never dared open in her parents' presence. Tonight, compelled by restlessness, she pried it apart. Inside lay a faded miniature of the First Lady Isolde, her father's tragic first wife, and a folded scrap of paper in handwriting Isolde did not recognize. The ink had browned, but the warning remained stark. Beware those who come from the sea bearing old names and older grudges. Her breath caught. The locket slipped from suddenly numb fingers, clinking softly against stone. Was this mere relic of past sorrow, or something aimed at the present? Dawn brought no clarity, only the arrival of Elias's formal request delivered over breakfast in the sunlit conservatory. Cassion read the parchment aloud, terms generous on the surface. Shared command of the beacon, joint trade ventures, protection against border incursions. Yet between the lines Isolde read the unspoken. Submission of Blackthorne's independence to Ravencrest ambition. Silence followed the reading. Outside, clouds thickened. The first raindrops pattered against glass panes. Seraphine broke it. "We will consider with care," she said, voice calm but edged. "No decision is made in haste beneath this roof." Elias inclined his head, gracious in apparent defeat. Yet his gaze lingered on Isolde with new intensity, as though the game had only begun. That afternoon, defying the downpour, Isolde rowed alone to the hidden cove below the cliffs, a place of jagged rocks and secret tides known only to Blackthorns. Rain needled her face. Waves thundered in white fury. She dismounted, letting her horse graze, and walked the shingle until she saw him. The stranger from the village market stood upon the wet sand, coat plastered to his broad frame, dark hair streaming water. His ship rode at anchor just beyond the reef, sails furled against the gale. He turned as she approached, and for the first time she heard his voice, low, roughened by salt and distance. "You should not be here in this weather, lady." "Nor should you," she countered, rain blurring the world to gray. "Yet here we both are." A pause, filled by the roar of surf. Then, "Thorne Marlowe," he said, offering a name at last. "Master of the Sea Wraith. And you are the daughter of the house that lights the way home." Lightning flickered, illuminating the scar that crossed his brow like a pale river. Something in his eyes, storm blue, fierce, unguarded, stirred an answering fire in her chest. "Ravencrest courts your hand," he said quietly. "He courts more than that. There are shadows behind his smiles." Isolde stepped closer, rain mingling with the salt on her cheeks. "Then tell me plainly, what shadows?" Thorne's gaze held hers, unreadable yet burning. "Some truths are dangerous to speak on open shores. But know this, not all who approach Blackthorne seek its light. Some seek to extinguish it." Their hands brushed as he steadied her against a sudden gust, an accidental touch that felt anything but accidental. Heat flared through the chill, sharp as lightning. She pulled away first, heart hammering. "I must know more." "Then watch the tide," he said. It reveals all things in time. Mounting her horse, Isolde rode back through the storm, cloak sodden, thoughts more turbulent than the sea. The betrothal's shadow had lengthened into something darker. An arranged alliance on one side, a forbidden stranger bearing warnings on the other. As she passed beneath the gates, thunder rolled overhead like the castle itself, drawing breath before the tempest truly broke. The inciting wave had crashed ashore. From this moment, there could be no retreat, only the choice between duty's cold harbor and desire's perilous open water. The days following Elias Ravencrest's arrival settled over Castle Blackthorne like a thickening sea mist, beautiful from a distance, treacherous up close. Outwardly, hospitality reigned. Fires blazed in every grate, tables groaned beneath roasted venison and spiced wine. Musicians played in the evenings, and the great hall rang with polite laughter. Yet beneath the courtesy ran currents too strong to ignore. Isolde felt them most keenly. Elias was ever at her side, escorting her through the conservatory, pointing out the advantages of his northern glasshouses. Joining her on cliff walks, his conversation bright with plans for shared fleets and unified beacons. Lingering in the library after supper to discuss poetry with an enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. His presence was never overt demand, only constant, courteous pressure, like waves wearing stone. She bore it with outward grace, chin high, answers measured. But each night she retreated to her chamber exhausted, the walls seeming closer than the night before. Her parents watched with quiet concern. Over private breakfasts in the Solar, Cashin spoke of border reports. Ravencrest vessels shadowing Blackthorne traders, old charters suddenly questioned in provincial courts. Seraphine shared fragments of her own history, how restraint once masked possession, how ambition could wear the mask of protection. "Guard your heart," she warned softly one morning, pressing a camellia into Isolde's hand. "But guard your judgment more fiercely." Isolde needed no urging. She began to seek Thorne Marlowe in earnest. Their meetings were stolen, perilous, intoxicating. A note left beneath a certain rock on the coastal path. A lantern signal from her window answered by the sea wraith's running light. Midnight descents to hidden coves where moonlight silvered the waves and the world narrowed to salt wind and whispered truths. Thorne spoke little of his past at first, only enough to kindle fire. "My family once held lands along the northern reefs," he said one night, as they sat upon a driftwood log with the tide lapping close. "Ravencrest stripped them through forged claims and quiet knives. I sail to reclaim what was stolen, not with armies, but with proof." His hand covered hers, calloused palm warm against her skin. "When I saw you in the village, I thought you part of their world. Then I looked closer." Isolde's breath caught. "And what did you see?" "A woman who carries light in her eyes, but storms in her heart, like calls to like." They kissed then, the first time, urgent, tasting of salt and risk. His arms strong around her, her fingers threading through sea-damp hair. The world fell away. Castle, betrothal, legacy. There was only the crash of waves and the thunder of her pulse. Yet red herrings bloomed even in passion. Elias's sister Vesper began to shadow her, appearing unexpectedly in corridors with honeyed questions. "You ride out often alone, Lady Isolde. The cliffs can be treacherous in fog." A forged letter surfaced in the village, bearing Thorne's seal, demanding payment from local smugglers, deliberately left where a Blackthorne groom might find it. Whispers reached Cashin. Sightings of the sea wraith too close to rival shipping lanes. Isolde confronted Thorne beneath a storm-threatening sky. "They say you traffic with pirates." His jaw tightened. "Ravencrest plants lies as easily as he plants spies. Search my hold yourself if you doubt me." She did, the next dawn, slipping aboard in fisherman's garb while the castle slept. The sea wraith was no smuggler's den. Charts meticulously kept, cargo holds filled with legitimate spices and silks, a locked cabin containing only documents, old land deeds, faded maps marked with Ravencrest forgeries, and one item that stopped her breath, a miniature portrait of the First Lady Isolde, identical to the one in the rusted locket. "Why do you carry her likeness?" she demanded when he found her there. Thorne's eyes darkened. "Because my grandmother served as her companion in the final months. She heard confessions, promises broken, hearts caged. The story shaped me. When I learned Blackthorne's heir was named for her," he reached for her hand, "I feared history repeating. Then I met you, and feared something worse. Losing you to the same gilded trap." The explanation rang true yet left shadows. They kissed again, fiercer this time, as thunder growled overhead and the first raindrops hissed against the deck. Back at the castle, tension coiled tighter. Elias hosted a grand hunt across the moors. Horns blaring, hawks wheeling, laughter brittle. Isolde rode beside him, his conversation turning intimate. "I could give you the world beyond these cliffs, Isolde. Travel, courts, power shared equally." His gloved hand brushed hers on the reins. She drew away, but not before Vesper noted the gesture with a satisfied smile. That evening, a discovery in the East Wing chamber deepened the tangle. Searching for solace among her father's old journals, Isolde found a new letter tucked between pages. Anonymous, delivered by unseen hand. The warning was stark. "The seafarer courts you to wound Blackthorne at its heart. Ask him of the Marlowe claim." She did, 3 nights later, in a sea cave lit only by drifting phosphorescence. Thorne grew still. "An old feud," he admitted at last. "My great-uncle once sought your grandfather's title through false lineage. Failed. Ravencrest resurrected the tale to discredit me." His arms tightened around her. "I swear on every wave that ever carried me. I want no claim but the one you freely give." Isolde believed him, wanted to believe him. Their embraces grew bolder, hands tracing boundaries that trembled on the edge of surrender. Yet each dawn brought fresh obstacles. Elias producing documents proving Thorne's piracy, Cassion's growing unease, Seraphine's quiet pleas to slow the tide. One afternoon, walking the battlements with her mother, Isolde confessed fragments. Not Thorne's name, but the existence of another suitor in her heart. Seraphine's face paled. "Love born in secrecy often drowns in it," she said. "Your father and I learned that truth through pain. Promise me caution." Isolde promised, but caution felt like chains. The part closed on a night of restless wind. Isolde stood at her window watching the sea wraith's lantern wink once, twice, then vanish into gathering fog. In her hand she clutched the anonymous letter, its ink now blurred by nervous fingers. Rising tension had become a knot drawn ever tighter. Soon something would have to give. What risks would you take for a love that feels like freedom, but might cost everything you were born to protect? Share your thoughts below. The storm that had threatened for weeks finally broke on a night when the moon hung hidden behind racing clouds, and the sea hurled itself against the cliffs with a fury that shook the very foundations of Castle Blackthorne. Isolde stood alone in the observatory atop the north tower, telescope trained upon the restless bay where the sea wraith rocked at anchor, her lantern winking like a star caught in mortal peril. She had come seeking clarity, but found only turmoil. The anonymous letter, "Ask him of the Marlowe claim," burned in her pocket like a coal. Days of searching the castle's archives had yielded fragments. An old provincial record mentioning a discredited lineage challenge against her grandfather, bearing the name Marlowe. Thorne's partial admissions had soothed her then, but doubt, once seated, grew swiftly in darkness. Lightning flared, illuminating the deck of the distant ship. For an instant she saw him, Thorne, coat whipping, staring toward the castle as though he could feel her gaze. Her heart twisted. She loved him. The realization had crept upon her like dawn, undeniable and bright. Yet love, her mother had once said, could blind as surely as it illuminated. Descending the spiral stair, Isolde fetched a cloak and slipped from the castle through a postern gate known only to Blackthornes. Rain lashed her face, Wine tore at her hood. She ran the cliff path by memory and moonlight, boots sliding on wet stone, until she reached the shingle cove where Thorne kept a small boat drawn up. He was waiting, as though summoned by the storm itself. "You should not be here," he shouted over the gale, catching her arms. Rain streamed down his scarred face. His eyes were dark with something she could not name. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "I must know the whole truth," she cried. "The Marlowe claim, what is it truly? What do you want from my house?" Lightning cracked again, closer. In its white glare she saw his expression fracture. "Come aboard," he said at last, voice rough. "There are things best shown, not told." They rowed through crashing waves to the sea wraith, the small boat rising and plunging like a living thing. Hands hauled her aboard. The deck heaved beneath her feet. Thorne led her below to the locked cabin she had once searched, now unlocked. Inside, by the sway of a single lantern, he opened a sea chest. Charts spilled out, then documents sealed with old wax. At the bottom lay a leather folio. He opened it with hands that trembled. Inside was not proof against Ravencrest. It was proof against Blackthorne. A family tree meticulously inked, showing a direct descent from a younger son of her great-grandfather. Disinherited, the record claimed, through forgery by her own ancestor. Land deeds, witness statements, a locket identical to the one in the armory, containing not the First Lady Isolde's portrait, but that of Thorne's great-grandmother, the disinherited bride. Isolde's breath stopped. "The claim was never discredited," Thorne said quietly. "It was buried. My family reduced to common sailors while Blackthorne rose. I came for justice, quiet restitution, perhaps even partnership. Then I saw you." His voice cracked, and everything changed. "I convinced myself love could heal old wounds, that if you chose me freely, the past might forgive itself." Another flash of lightning. In its merciless light she saw the rest. Letters in his hand, drafts of demands addressed to the provincial council, dated before he had ever spoken her name. "You used me," she whispered. "No," he reached for her. She stepped back. "I fell in love with you. Every meeting, every kiss, those were true. I burned the final demand the night you came aboard. I chose you over vengeance." But the words arrived too late. The folio trembled in her hands. All the red herrings, the forged piracy letters, the whispers, had been Ravencrest's work, yes. But the deeper deception had been Thorne's from the beginning. Tears mingled with rain on her cheeks. "You let me believe you were the victim. You let me defend you to my parents. Risk everything for a lie. I was going to tell you tonight," he said desperately. "The storm delayed me." "The storm," she echoed bitterly. "Always the storm." She fled the cabin, up onto the deck where rain slashed sideways and waves broke over the rail. Thorne followed, shouting her name, but thunder drowned him. The small boat had been swamped. There was no escape but the sea itself. Lightning revealed the cliff path far above, a thin black line against the castle's distant lights. Isolde ran to the rail. "Isolde, wait!" She turned once. In the next flash she saw him clearly. Face ravaged, arms outstretched. The man she had loved reduced to a stranger wearing his skin. "Stay away from Blackthorne," she said, voice carrying over the gale with the cold authority of her blood. "If you ever truly cared, sail away and never return." She dove into the churning water. The cold shocked breath from her lungs. Waves battered her like fists. But she was a Blackthorne, born to these coasts. She swam with desperate strength, stroke after stroke, until hands, servants roused by the storm, hauled her sodden and shivering onto the shingle. Behind her, the sea wraith's lantern winked once, twice, then vanished into the dark, sails unfurling as Thorne obeyed her final command. In the castle, wrapped in blankets before a roaring fire, Isolde told her parents everything. Cassion's face aged 10 years in a moment. Seraphine held her while she wept, not for lost love, but for the trust it had cost. The midpoint had been reached in a cabin lit by betrayal's lantern. Beliefs shattered, stakes raised to ruin. Ravencrest's ambition now loomed unchecked. Thorne's wounded departure left dangerous knowledge in his wake, and Isolde's heart lay in pieces amid the wreckage. She had chosen freedom once, wildly. Now she understood its true price. The game had changed utterly. From this night forward, nothing, not legacy, not love, not the castle itself, would remain the same. If this shattering revelation hit you like lightning, subscribe now. The storm is far from over, and what rises from these ruins will burn brighter than before. The storm passed by morning, leaving a world scoured raw. Sky bleached to pale iron, sea sullen and slate gray, drifts of torn kelp strewn across the shingle like the wreckage of drowned dreams. Castle Blackthorne stood silent under the weak sun, its towers dripping, raven banner hanging limp and sodden. Inside, the hearths burned low, as though the house itself mourned. Isolde did not leave her chamber for 3 days. She lay curled beneath heavy indigo covers, staring at nothing, while rain's aftermath drummed softly on the panes. Food arrived on trays, broth, bread, camellias that withered untouched. Servants came and went on silent feet. Even Mrs. Harrow's sharp eyes softened with worry. Seraphine sat with her for hours, stroking her hair as she had when Isolde was small and fevered. But no words passed between them that carried weight enough to breach the wall of silence Isolde had built around her heart. On the second night, fever came, born not of chill but of grief too vast to contain. She burned and shook, murmuring Thorne's name in delirium, then recoiling from it as from a blade. Cassian paced the corridor outside, silver head bowed, fists clenched at his sides. When the fever broke at dawn, he entered and sat upon the bed's edge, taking her hand with a gentleness that belied his strength. "I have failed you," he said quietly. "I swore no child of this house would ever be caged, yet I let a wolf wear the mask of freedom." Isolde turned her face into the pillow. "I let him in, father. I chose him. The fault is mine." No, his voice was iron wrapped in velvet. Deception is never the fault of the deceived. Yet the words could not reach the deepest wound. The knowledge that every kiss, every whispered vow, every moment of surrender aboard the sea wraith had been built upon a foundation of calculated vengeance. She had defended him to her parents, risked legacy and reputation, opened her heart wide, and all the while he had carried proof that could have toppled Blackthorne itself. On the 4th day, Elias Ravencrest requested a private audience. Isolde received him in the solar, gowned in severe charcoal, hair bound tightly back, face pale but composed. He entered with his customary grace, but his eyes gleamed with something new, triumph thinly veiled as sympathy. "I have heard disturbing rumors, Lady Isolde," he began, seating himself unbidden. "A certain seafarer seen fleeing in the storm. Whispers of documents that might challenge your house's title." He leaned forward, voice honeyed. "Such scandals could ruin Blackthorne's standing. But a union with Ravencrest would silence them forever. My protection, my name, would shield you from every threat." The implication hung rank in the air. "Marry me, or watch your legacy burn." Isolde met his gaze steadily. "You mistake me, my lord. Blackthorne has weathered worse than rumors. We do not buy silence with surrender." Elias's smile thinned. "Pride is a luxury in perilous times. Consider carefully." He departed with a bow that felt like a threat. That evening, Vesper cornered her in the long gallery, moonlight striping the floor through high windows. "My brother is generous," she said softly, venom sweet as poison. "He offers salvation when others bring only ruin. That Marlowe creature, he used you ill. Everyone knows it now. The village buzzes. Soon the province will." Isolde's hands clenched at her sides. "Let them buzz." But the words followed her into sleep, twisting into nightmares. The castle crumbling into the sea, her parents' faces aged with shame, Thorne laughing from the deck of his ship as it sailed away with Blackthorne's honor in its wake. She woke gasping, heart pounding. For the first time, true hopelessness settled over her. Not mere grief, but the cold certainty that nothing could be mended. Thorne had taken something vital with him, her trust in her own judgment, her belief in the creed of freedom her parents had lived. If love could be so thoroughly poisoned, what was left? She wandered the corridors at midnight, drawn inevitably to the east wing chamber. The lantern still burned. The portrait of the first Isolde gazed down with eyes that now seemed to accuse. Isolde sank to her knees before it. "I was to be your redemption," she whispered. "Instead I nearly became your echo, destroyed by a heart I chose too hastily." Tears came then, hot and unrelenting. She wept for the girl who had run to the cove full of fire, for the love that had felt like flight but proved a plummet, for the legacy that suddenly seemed fragile as sea foam. Outside, the sea murmured its endless, indifferent song. In the great hall below, Cassian and Seraphine sat late by dying embers. He held the rusted locket Isolde had brought them, the one linking Thorne's claim. "If he speaks this aloud to the council," Cassian began. "He will not," Seraphine said fiercely. "He loved her. I saw it in his eyes the night she came home half-drowned. Love and vengeance warred in him, and love lost. He will carry the wound in silence." "Yet the damage is done," Cassian replied heavily. "Our daughter believes herself the architect of ruin." Seraphine's hand tightened on his. "Then we must remind her what Blackthorne is built upon. Not stone or title, but the courage to choose again after falling." But in the abyss of her doubt, Isolde could not yet hear them. She remained upon the chapel floor until dawn grayed the windows, hollow-eyed, heart-scoured empty. The darkest hour had come. Legacy teetered on the edge of loss. Trust lay in shards. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Thorne Marlowe sailed with a broken claim and a broken heart, leaving Isolde to face the gathering wolves alone. She had touched the depths. Now the only question was whether she would drown, or find the strength to rise. The weak winter sun had climbed to its zenith before Isolde finally emerged from the east wing chamber, eyes shadowed but dry, posture straight as the cliffs themselves. Something had shifted in the long night upon the chapel floor. Not healing, not yet, but a hardening, like steel drawn from fire and plunged into cold water. Grief remained, raw and aching, but beside it burned a new flame, resolve. She found her parents in the library, bent together over old charts spread across the long table. Maps of Vermore's coasts, trade routes marked in faded ink, boundary lines disputed and redrawn across generations. They looked up as she entered, and for a moment no one spoke. Seraphine's face held cautious hope, Cassian's guarded relief. Isolde crossed to them, footsteps steady on the worn flagstones. "I am done drowning," she said quietly. "Thorne took my trust, but he did not take my name. Blackthorne stands because we choose what it will become, not because old claims or new ambitions dictate it." Cassian rose slowly, searching her face. "And what do you choose, daughter?" "To fight," she answered. "Not with his weapons of secrecy and half-truths, but with ours, truth openly faced." Seraphine reached for her hand. "Truth can wound as deeply as deception." "Then let it wound me first," Isolde replied. "I will not let fear of pain chain us again." That afternoon, she summoned Elias Ravencrest to the solar. He arrived promptly, golden hair gleaming, smile assured, until he saw her expression. "I have considered your offer," she began, voice calm as deep water. "Blackthorne will not purchase safety through marriage, but neither will we ignore the threats gathering beyond our gates. If Ravencrest truly seeks alliance against common peril, let it be forged in openness. Shared councils, joint patrols, mutual defense, without surrender of sovereignty on either side." Elias's smile faltered. "A bold counter-proposal, Lady Isolde. Yet rumors persist of irregularities in your title. An alliance of equals would quiet them far more effectively than proud isolation. Isolde met his gaze without flinching. Let the rumors come into the light, then. Blackthorne has nothing to hide. We will present every charter, every deed, every record to the provincial council. If flaws are found, we will answer for them openly. But if they prove baseless, her voice hardened, those who spread them will answer to us. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Elias's polished features. He bowed, retreating with graceful excuses, but Isolde saw the calculation behind his eyes. The game had shifted. The prey had shown teeth. That evening, she climbed once more to the observatory. The sky had cleared to a vault of stars. The sea lay black and glittering below, whispering its ancient rhythm. She opened the telescope case but did not raise the instrument. Instead, she drew from her pocket the rusted locket and the folio Thorne had shown her, the documents he had left behind in his flight, perhaps deliberately, perhaps in haste. She studied them by lantern light, the family tree, the deeds, the faded testimonies. Some bore marks of forgery, subtle inconsistencies in ink and seal that her father's trained eye would confirm. Others held grains of uncomfortable truth, boundary disputes long buried, compensations never paid. Not enough to topple Blackthorne, but enough to wound if wielded with malice. A decision crystallized. She descended to her father's study, where Cassian and Seraphine waited with charts and wine. Laying the folio upon the desk, Isolde spoke without preamble. These are Thorne's weapons, the Marlowe claim in full. He carried them as both shield and sword. I will not hide them away like shameful secrets. Tomorrow I ride to the provincial seat. I will present them myself to the council, with every Blackthorne record beside them. Let judgment fall where it will. If restitution is owed, we will pay it honorably. If the greater part is fraud, we will expose it. Either way, the shadow ends. Seraphine's eyes widened. Child, this could reopen wounds decades old. Better opened and cleansed than left to fester, Isolde said. Thorne taught me painfully that secret's poison. We will not repeat the mistakes of any generation. Cassian studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Pride kindled in his storm-gray eyes. You have your mother's fire and something new, courage that looks straight into the storm. Preparations began at once. Servants packed documents into sealed cases. Messengers were dispatched to summon trusted allies. Isolde chose her wardrobe with care. Gowns of Blackthorne black and silver, severe yet regal. In the armory, she selected a slender dagger her mother had once carried on her own journeys of defiance, slipping it into a hidden sheath. On the eve of departure, Seraphine found her in the conservatory among the camellias. Moonlight filtered through glass panes, silvering the blooms. I was younger than you, Seraphine said softly. When I walked into this house believing myself captive, I never imagined I would one day watch my daughter ride out to defend it with open hands rather than drawn sword. Isolde turned, throat tight. I am terrified. Good, her mother replied, embracing her. Terror means you understand the stakes. But remember, you do not ride alone. Dawn of departure broke clear and cold. In the courtyard, horses stamped steam into the frosty air. The raven banner snapped briskly overhead. Cassian pressed a sealed letter into her hand. His own testimony, should the council require it. Seraphine fastened a cloak of deep indigo about her shoulders, fingers lingering. Isolde mounted, posture erect, honey-brown hair bound in a severe braid that gleamed like bronze in the rising light. She looked once more upon the castle towers proud against the sky, windows glowing with farewell, and felt the weight of every ancestor who had stood upon these stones. Then she turned her horse toward the cliff road, escort at her back, documents at her side, heart ablaze with the flame that had finally caught and held. The abyss had been touched. Now she rose from it, not unscathed, but unbowed. The turning point had come. An irreversible choice made, a gauntlet thrown. Whatever judgment awaited in the provincial halls, Blackthorne would meet it with eyes open and head high. The storm's heart had passed. Ahead lay the reckoning, and whatever dawn it might bring. The provincial seat of Vermore lay 3 days' hard ride inland, perched upon a hill where ancient stone halls overlooked fertile valleys and distant glimpses of the sea. Isolde arrived at dusk on the 3rd day, cloak dusted with road grime, escort weary but vigilant. The council chambers, a vast, vaulted edifice of weathered granite, loomed ahead, torches flaring in brackets like watchful eyes. Word of her coming had spread. Curious nobles and merchants gathered in the courtyard, whispers rising like gulls above a catch. She entered alone, carrying the sealed cases herself. No footman, no herald, only the Blackthorne raven embroidered in silver upon her cloak. The great doors swung inward, and she stepped into the hall where her fate and her house's would be weighed. The council sat upon a raised dais. 7 lords and ladies of the oldest blood, faces carved by years and power. At their center presided the Lord Provost, a stern woman of 60 with iron-gray hair and eyes sharp as winter stars. Elias Ravencrest was already present, seated to the right in a place of honor, golden hair gleaming beneath the chandelier's light. His smile was courteous, but triumph glinted behind it. Vesper sat beside him, pale and watchful. Isolde advanced to the petitioner's mark, setting the cases upon the stone floor with deliberate care. Silence fell, thick as storm clouds. "Lady Isolde Blackthornne," the provost intoned, "you have requested open hearing on matters touching title and legacy. Speak your purpose." Isolde lifted her chin, voice ringing clear through the vaulted space. "I come not to defend in shadows, but to lay truth bare. Rumors assail my house, claims of illegitimacy, whispers of piracy, threats of ruin. I bring every charter, every deed, every record Blackthorne has held since its founding. And with them, the documents that fuel these rumors, the so-called Marlowe claim in full. Let all be examined in open light. If fault lies with my blood, we will answer. If malice lies with others, let that too be seen." A murmur rippled through the hall. Elias leaned forward, expression smoothly concerned. "A noble gesture, my lady, yet unnecessary. Ravencrest stands ready to shield Blackthorne from such unpleasantness through alliance." "No shield bought with surrender," Isolde cut in, voice steady as steel. "Only truth." The provost raised a hand for silence. "The documents will be examined." Council retires to deliberation. All parties remain within the hall until judgment is rendered. Hours passed. Torches burned lower. Shadows lengthened. Isolde stood unmoving, posture unbowed, while Elias paced with barely concealed impatience. Servants brought wine. She refused it. Her mind ranged over the cliffs of home, the faces of her parents, the portrait of the first Isolde whose sorrow had shaped so much. At last the council returned. The provost rose, parchment in hand. "We have examined the records with care," she declared. "The greater part of the Marlowe claim bears marks of forgery. Ink mismatched, seals tampered, testimonies coerced. The remainder concerns minor boundary disputes long settled by compensation unclaimed. No threat to Blackthorne's primary title exists." Relief flickered through Isolde, but she held her expression still. "However," the provost continued, "evidence has surfaced of deliberate dissemination of these forgeries in recent months, traced to agents in Ravencrest employ." Gasps echoed. Elias's face drained of color. "Lord Elias Ravencrest," the provost said coldly, "you stand accused of malice and attempted subversion. Have you defense?" He rose swiftly, composure cracking. "Mere rumor, my lady provost. Overzealous servants, perhaps. Servants who bear your seal and cipher?" She held up a letter, intercepted correspondence ordering the spread of discord. "The council finds against you," Ravencrest forfeits claim to Northern Harbor rights for 10 years. Reparations will be assessed. And your proposed union with Blackthorne is declared null. Attempted under false pretenses. Elias stared, golden facade shattered. Vesper clutched his arm, face ashen. Guards stepped forward at the provost's nod. But the storm's true fury was not yet spent. As Elias was escorted from the dais, a side door burst open. A mud-spattered rider stumbled in, Blackthorne colors upon his breast, face wild with urgency. "My Lady Isolde," he gasped. "The castle under attack." Ravencrest ships blockaded the beacon at dawn. Armed men landed at the cove. Lord Cashin holds the gates, but they press hard. The hall erupted in chaos. Isolde's blood turned to ice, then fire. "How many?" she demanded. "3 vessels. Mercenaries. They mean to take the castle by force while the council deliberates." Elias's pallor shifted to stark fear. He had not known the full extremity of his own agent's plans. Isolde turned to the provost. "Blackthorne stands besieged. I ride for home. Will Vermore honor its oaths of mutual defense?" The provost's eyes met hers, recognition of one woman of power to another. "Aye. Provincial forces ride with you." Within the hour, Isolde thundered from the gates at the head of a column. Her own escort, council guards, loyal houses roused by the outrage. They rode through the night, torches streaming like comets, hooves drumming thunder upon the road. Dawn found them cresting the final ridge. Below, Castle Blackthorne stood defiant against the sea. Smoke rising from the outer wall, the Raven banner still flying. Ravencrest ships lay offshore, but one listed heavily, sails in tatters. The beacon tower blazed bright, guiding no enemy but the returning storm. Isolde spurred her horse down the cliff road, sword drawn, the slender dagger now joined by a proper blade from the provincial armory. The attackers, caught between defenders within and reinforcements without, broke ranks. Fighting was fierce but brief. Mercenaries surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. Ravencrest captains scuttled one ship and fled with the others. By midday, the castle was secured. Isolde rode through the gates to find Cashin upon the steps, bloodied but unbowed, Seraphine beside him with a bow still in hand. They embraced without words, the 3 of them holding fast amid cheering servants and exhausted guards. In the great hall that evening, wounds bound and fires roaring, the council's judgment was read aloud by herald. Elias Ravencrest stripped of honors, his house humbled. Blackthorne vindicated, its title affirmed beyond question. Isolde stood before the hearth, gazing into the flames. The cost had been high, good men wounded, walls scarred, but the legacy stood stronger, cleansed by open trial and defended by open hand. Outside, the sea settled into calm, reflecting a sky washed clean. The storm's fury had unleashed its worst, and Blackthorne had weathered it, not by chains or deception, but by the fierce, chosen light of truth. If you're breathless from this reckoning, subscribe now, because the dawn that follows will reveal a legacy reborn in fire and freedom. The final tide had turned. Ahead lay healing, and whatever new horizons courage might dare. Spring returned to Vermore with a gentleness that felt almost miraculous after the winter's tempests, both those of sky and heart. The cliffs burst into green life, wildflowers nodding in the breeze like bright pennants of forgiveness. The sea, once a raging adversary, now lapped the rocks below Castle Blackthorne with the soft insistence of a lover seeking reconciliation. The scars of siege remained. A blackened patch upon the outer wall, a cracked merlin upon the western tower, but already masons worked with chisel and mortar, and ivy had begun its patient climb to heal what stone could not hide. Inside the castle, renewal moved more slowly, but no less surely. Isolde walked the battlements each dawn, honey-brown hair unbound and streaming in the wind, her posture no longer defiant but quietly sovereign. The luminous gray eyes that had once streamed tears now held a steadier light, tempered by fire, deepened by wisdom. She had returned from the provincial seat not merely vindicated, but transformed. The girl who had run to forbidden coves had become the woman who rode at the head of an army to defend her home. The province spoke of her now with awe, the heir of Blackthornne who laid truth upon the council table and drew steel to guard it. Elias Ravencrest's fall rippled outward like stones cast into still water. His house humbled, its harbors forfeited, its ambitions curtailed. Whispers once aimed at Blackthorne now circled him. The lord who reached too far and grasped only air. He departed Vermore for distant estates, golden hair dulled by disgrace, taking Vesper with him into a quieter, colder exile. And Thorne Marlowe? No word came from the sea wraith. Some said he sailed beyond known charts, seeking coasts where old names held no power. Others claimed sightings far south, his vessel a dark silhouette against foreign suns. Isolde did not seek him. The wound had closed, not into forgetfulness, but into understanding. Love had been real, yet poisoned at the root. She forgave him in silence, not for his sake, but for her own, releasing the last chain he had unwittingly forged. One soft May evening, the family gathered in the conservatory as camellias released their heavy perfume into the twilight air. Seraphine played a gentle air upon the pianoforte. Cassian turned pages with the same reverent care he brought to gathering blooms each dawn. Isolde sat beside them, fingers tracing idle patterns upon the keys in quiet harmony. The ritual had changed subtly. Now 30 camellias filled the crystal vase upon the mantel, one for each year of her parents' marriage, plus 3 new blooms, white and perfect, gathered by Isolde's own hand before sunrise. Promise kept forward, not merely backward. Cassian broke the companionable silence. The council offers you a seat among them, the youngest ever granted. Isolde smiled faintly. I will accept, but only as Blackthorne's voice, not its ruler. The cliffs call me home. Seraphine's eyes shone. And what of your own heart, my love? Will it sail again? Isolde considered the question, gazing through glass panes at the calm sea painted rose by sunset. It sails already, freely, widely, without fear of hidden reefs. When the right harbor appears, I will know it by its honesty, not its promise alone. Years would pass before that harbor revealed itself. A quiet scholar of maritime law who came to chart new trade routes, whose steady eyes held no shadows, whose courtship was patient and open as daylight. But that is another tale, for another season. In the 3rd summer after the storm, a festival filled the great hall. Provincial lords and ladies come not to pity or conspire, but to celebrate Blackthorne's enduring light. Music soared. Laughter echoed from rafters long accustomed to silence. Isolde moved among the guests in a gown of deep indigo scattered with silver ravens, her parents at her side. Cassian's silver hair gleaming beneath chandeliers, Seraphine radiant in sapphire silk, their hands linked with the ease of a lifetime's choice. Later, upon the highest battlement beneath a crescent moon, the 3 stood together as they often did. The beacon burned steady below, guiding ships safely home. Far out upon the water, lanterns winked in answer, mariners acknowledging the light that had never failed them. Seraphine rested her head upon Cassian's shoulder. We came to this house as captives of duty, she said softly. Our daughter leaves it as its freest guardian. Cassian's arm encircled them both. Freedom is the rarest inheritance and the hardest one. She has claimed it not by birth alone, but by fire and truth. Isolde looked out over the endless sea, wind lifting her hair like a banner. I was given a legacy forged from chains broken, she murmured. In defending it, I learned the final link. Freedom is not the absence of storms, but the courage to sail through them with open eyes and steady hand. Below, lights glowed warm in every window of Castle Blackthorne. No longer a citadel of isolation or sorrow, but a haven of chosen light. The raven banner stirred gently in the breeze, wings spread not in warning, but welcome. And upon those cliffs, Beneath stars that had witnessed centuries of human longing and triumph, Isolde stood between the parents who had taught her choice, and felt, at last, the full measure of peace. The dawn promised to every generation had come. Not perfect, not painless, but luminous with possibility. Love freely sought, freely given, freely defended. Legacy not imposed, but claimed. And in the sacred ordinary moments, shared glances, gentle touches, camellias gathered before sunrise. They lived the truth their house had earned across storms and years, that when hearts choose truth over illusion, duty over deception, and courage over fear, even the deepest wounds bloom into enduring light. Castle Blackthorne kept its ancient watch, but now it rang with life renewed. And upon its cliffs, beneath an eternal tide of stars, Isolde walked home, hand in hand with those she loved, not as heir alone, but as the living vow that freedom, once won, could be passed forward forever. How did this ending land for you? The storms weathered, the light reclaimed. Did Isolde's journey resonate, or spark thoughts of your own legacies and choices? Share in the comments below, and if these tides carried you through, subscribe for more stories of hearts forged in fire and freedom. The next horizon awaits.